Hello, Waffle lovers, and welcome to another episode of Whatever Flips Your Waffle here on 365sportscast.com. I'm your host, Mark Domeyer, coming to you, as always, from the bunker deep in the heart of southern Minnesota. I'm always excited to join you to talk about Minnesota sports. I'm glad you've decided to join me as well. Welcome, as always, to those of you who tune in each and every week here on 365sportscast.com. And welcome to those of you who may be tuning in for the first time. I hope you'll enjoy things and will want to come back for more. Sit back, relax, prepare yourself for another helping of waffles, syrup optional. I've got my first returning guest this week. That's right. I've now been around long enough. I'm bringing back somebody. Andrew Neuruer is back this time to talk about the Vikings and the Timberwolves. Here we go. Joining the program this week at 365sportscast.com, my first return interview. Andrew Neuruer is back with us. Last time he joined Whatever Flips Your Waffle, we talked about Twins. Today we're going to kind of switch our focus and look at the Vikings and the Timberwolves. Andrew, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew's got a lot of pots and pans on the stove, so to say. If you check out letstalkmnsports.com, he's got a ton of material on there about all your favorite Minnesota professional sports teams. You can find him on Twitter at Let's Talk Twins or Wolves or Vikes or Wild. And then I think you have a podcast as well on the Anchor.fm network.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of things on there. I mean, if you enjoy the stuff we talk about here weekly, you're certainly going to enjoy things that Andrew has on there. So I want to talk Vikings first. They've kind of finished off. They've done their OTAs, their mandatory mini camp. Just start kind of the biggest reactions that you have of a couple things that we've seen that have come out of these things that have happened post-draft.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is just the wide receiver room. I think we kind of knew all the depth with Thielen, Justin Jefferson, and then you have KJ Osborne, etc. And then kind of the news about Amir Smith-Marset being injured. That was it was almost just kind of thrown in there, and I think it was first brought on to people's it was first brought on to the idea when they saw him at I believe it was Adam Thielen's softball event where people saw him in a boot. But apparently, I guess it's not that serious. But I think that was also kind of one thing that I talked about a lot in the podcast. I was like, okay, maybe we thought maybe he'd be the fourth receiver, but I mean, it sounds like it's not serious, so that's
right.
good. But
right, plenty of time, and they've got 6 weeks off here or something before training camp starts. And even you throw in there, they signed Albert Wilson as potential.
Yeah.
BC Johnson is back from injury from last year. I've speculated that our wide receiver depth and talent is possibly better than anybody in the league.
No, for sure. And that's really what caught my eye is because now you do have all of BC Johnson back. You signed Albert Wilson. You have all these players that can kind of contribute. And even if Smith-Marset is injured and he's going to miss a couple more weeks, it's not really a huge hit to the offense, to get them kind of going before the season starts. But yeah, it's a good thing to have. It's a good problem to have.
Yes, yeah, a little bit like the Twins in starting pitching these days. Yeah. So when you bring this up in the new coaches and new systems and everything, and kind of what I've been seeing and hearing as the Vikings go through these OTAs and the mini camp, they haven't really been going full speed. It's more about learning the system, and Coach Kevin O'Connell talks about their intelligence and understanding things.
Yeah, and I think, and we've seen a lot of comments being talked about with not even just jabs at the former coaching regime. We're seeing now they're talking about it's going to be more modern day offense, or they're going to be passing more instead of running, which I think obviously you want to hammer giving Dalvin Cook the ball because he's one of the best running backs in the league. But then at the other side of it, you can be like, well, if he gets less touches, maybe he stays healthier for a couple more games. So
right, yeah. Well, and we've seen too, they fiddled a little bit with maybe Dalvin Cook lines up at wide receiver sometimes, and why not? I mean, you could have him out. You put your best offensive players in the field sometimes.
Yeah, and he's more than capable enough of being a receiving back. We've seen how successful he could be in that category. I think another player is Smith Jr. Getting him back is going to be just another elite weapon for Kirk Cousins to find, whether it's going to be Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson. Now he has Smith Jr. out there. And as great as Conklin was, he's not that same offensive player as Smith Jr. can be. So I think that's another angle as well.
Right. And do you have any concern, because I know he's still coming back from his injury last year, Irv is, about whether he'll be ready? Any indications that he won't be ready for training camp?
Not that I've seen. It sounds like he's been good to go. Nothing's really been brought up to attention that maybe he's a little slower, maybe he needs maybe an extra week or two to get into a full strength. I think he's had enough time where I think he's just ready to go.
Yeah. Well, I was reading, too, how they brought over, he played for the Rams last year, Munt. His first name eludes me right now, as another tight end. And, if O'Connell's bringing a guy over that he's familiar with, that can only help the system, too. Well, he's backup or whatever, but I'm picturing some unique offensive formations, and I'm even picturing the idea of Dalvin Cook lined up at wide receiver and Alexander Mattison in the backfield. I mean,
yeah.
And you put Jefferson and Thielen and whatever. How do you stop that? I mean,
yeah, no, it's going to be. I think last year we saw maybe like their offense try to carry the defense too much, especially when they would give up a lot of deep passes for a touchdown or just giving up way too many blown coverages. And I think if you could see how good that offense was last year with maybe a more conservative offense, you can only imagine how good it's going to be now with a modern day head coach who's coming from the Los Angeles Rams, who knows how to win, who knows how to maybe specialize in a certain area.
Right. I'm picturing, too, my mind starts thinking about fantasy football, and I'm thinking, boy, how high are these Vikings skill players going to go in a fantasy draft this year? I mean, Dalvin Cook would be a given, Justin Jefferson probably, but you're going to have a guy like an Irv Smith Jr. might be a top tight end just because people are expecting that explosiveness.
Yeah, and I think he could even be a sleeper pick, to be honest, because he missed all that time, or maybe he's not on your radar.
Yeah.
And, I mean, he has the potential to easily go off or be one of the top 5 tight ends in the league.
Yeah, right. Now, what's going to hold them back offensively? Is it the offensive line and that kind of inconsistency we've seen? Is that the one sticking point that can keep them from being a really special unit?
Yeah, I think, honestly, if you're trying to nitpick at things, maybe it's how complex maybe the offensive how complex the playbook is now, because Adam Thielen said on Pat McAfee's show that this is the most learning he's had to do since he's entered the league. So it's either got to be like something around those lines, or maybe it is the offensive line. Maybe they didn't get another, because he's had a lot of players on the line, but most of it's kind of just depth. I'm sure some of those guys will start, but in the whole like long-term, like bigger picture, I don't really see. Maybe by week 8, you're gonna be thinking like, hey, maybe they should have done a little more here.
Right. Yeah. It's that concern because the offensive line has been that sticking point for so many years now, it seems like, and I think, wow, boy, we could do this and this, but you also have to give Kirk Cousins some time back there to find his receivers, and you want to go deep and you want to do this and that. So hopefully, Garrett Bradbury certainly on the hot seat this year. They didn't, pick up the option on his rookie contract, so maybe he's got something to prove. Maybe he finally steps up and does something.
Yeah, and hopefully it's him. I think you can look at Garrett Bradbury, and I think you look at Wyatt Davis, who I think a lot of us thought he would maybe start at some point last season. He never did, so he's another one of those guys. Guard help is probably the biggest area of need, because you have Darisaw, the left tackle, you kind of saw good bits and pieces of, but you never really saw the full thing because he didn't start till late. And then obviously you have Brian O'Neill on the right side, who's been a rock on the Vikings line for just a really long time now. So I think maybe Wyatt Davis steps in, maybe you see a little more from him. Garrett Bradbury kind of finally shows us what we've been missing for a while now.
Yeah.
There's a reason we drafted him number 1. He's athletic, but yeah, it's a huge kind of X factor part of the offensive line for sure.
Right. We've got Andrew Neururer back with us here on Whatever Flips Your Waffle. We're talking Vikings this week. Talking about offense, let's switch over to the defense. In addition to, everything else that's changing on the defense, is Ed Donatel going to make a huge difference? I mean, is he one of those, you talk about bringing a new coaching staff, but Ed Donatel, he knows what he's doing out there.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for me that's getting me really excited is the whole switch to a 3-4. I think that's where Minnesota's going to find a lot of success. We've done the 4-3 for quite some time now. And if they bring back Anthony Barr, which is where he'll succeed the most, is because, he had how many sacks at UCLA? Was it like 8 to 10 or whatever it was back in college? So. And that was a 3-4 defense, and we've been kind of misusing him in a way. Right. And I think moving to a 3-4 where he can be on the edge, where he can rush the quarterback with his physical strength, his body, and everything, I think that's going to be huge.
Do you think? With the personnel we have and bringing in people like Zadarius Smith and stuff, this 3-4 defense is absolutely the right move, right? Anybody else that this is really going to help as far as that switch goes?
Yeah, so I think that's another play you bring in. You brought in Zadarius Smith. You brought in Hicks from Arizona. Those are you're just bringing a lot of guys who are going to be able to really contribute to that 3-4, where they're going to maybe have a little more speed on the outside. And it's going to be more, I think we see a lot, I don't know the word to use, but it's going to be a lot better in a sense, especially because they also signed Harrison Phillips at Minnesota. If I look it up, I don't know. They're bottom 5 or whatever it was in stopping the run. And Harrison Phillips on Pro Football Focus had a top 5 run defensive grade. So you upgrade in that area as well. So not only do you have guys on the outside running in, but you also have a guy who is one of the best at stopping the run. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that it was obvious watching them last year that was, oh my gosh, that you and I might have been able to get some good yardage out there. Is it, much like changing the offense and the references Thielen made to having to learn so much, this switch to a new defense, is that going to take a lot of time to figure out too, or is that easier switching defenses because you don't have, your playbook isn't nearly as deep?
Yeah, I'm not as worried about it because I think we've seen them maybe bring in a couple more guys that would specialize in the 3-4 versus the 4-3. So I think I'm not as worried about that as maybe the offense, where they're going to have to do more route running. They're going to have to block a certain way, where the defense, they're just bringing in guys who will be able to come in, understand the defensive scheme, and go from there.
Right. Fill their gaps, kind of read what they think the offense is running, and react to the ball. How about our How about our rookie class? The draft picks. Who do you see as being able to step up and having an impact right away, compared to being maybe more of a long-term developing prospect?
It feels like a cheap answer to say the top 2 picks, but I think just because our secondary was so bad last year, and we let go Xavier, last name, Xavier Woods.
Yeah.
We got rid of him, so he's no longer there. So he's gonna have so we have Lewis Seam now in the safety position, and then you have Andrew Booth Jr. If he can stay healthy,
yes,
that's great. But it's kind of a cheap answer, but at the same time, those were the 2 biggest needs, and they kind of filled that in a way. So,
and that's
I think those are the 2 guys that are going to step in.
Yeah, and that's why you draft them so high, because you expect them to be able to, play immediately. And again,
exactly.
Yeah, we've heard O'Connell say, "I'm going to put my best players in the field, even if it's not necessarily the position you would have them listed at on the depth chart." And so that conjures some images too of what this could look like. Because that secondary, it got so picked apart last year, and partly because there wasn't pressure on the quarterback often enough. But there's a lot of hope. Have you gotten over yet? I still struggle when I stop and think about it. Trading draft picks to the Lions and the Packers, is that sunk in? Okay, it was probably okay, or are we going to regret that down the line?
Yeah, I'm still 50-50 on it, because obviously trading within your division could come back to bite you in the butt and everything, but I know I've talked to someone else on my podcast about, I was like, whatever, it's kind of the Lions, but at the same time, they are kind of building something. Yep. So maybe in 5 years, they look a lot better than they obviously do now. the Packers, obviously that scares me the most just because Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay, all the success they've had. But
yes.
It looks like it hasn't really come back to, I don't know, I can just draft picks, they could either be a hit or miss, so it's hard to tell now, but I think maybe in 5 years we're going to regret the Detroit one more than Green Bay.
Right. Well, and Kwesi's come out and he's explained his rationale, and it's just, I think we're getting used to a different mindset than when Spielman was here. Kwesi's shown a little bit of what he intends to do, and still we got to, in 5 years we might sit here and talk and look back and say, wow, he's really made some brilliant moves, or we might say, what in the world happened? But they're doing, again, I can draw the analogy to the Twins a little bit. I think they're trying to do, without completely tearing it down and starting over, they think they can be competitive, and they're adding the pieces. If it blows up this year and they're not, you might see a lot of changes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Minnesota's just been running it back with all these guys for so long now. It's kind of like, yeah, well, it hasn't worked in the past couple of years, so why are we continuing to try it? But we're seeing a little bit more now with this new regime. They're changing the defense, and now they're adding a few more guys and letting some of those familiar faces go, which I think is going to be better in the long run. Because, if it hasn't happened yet, it's not going to happen now.
Right, yeah. We've talked about offense, we've talked about defense. Nobody ever wants to talk about special teams, but I look at that, coming out of the mini camp, it looks like Greg Joseph, quote unquote, won the kicker competition. They had brought in some competition. But I looked at last year, I thought the special teams was probably the best it had been in a long time, and yet they're still bringing in that competition. Bringing in a competition for a punter who I thought did an okay job last year. But special teams, as we've seen in the past, can make a big difference.
Yeah, we had a lot of success, obviously, with Percy Harvin in the past. You had Cordero Patterson. Kenny Nwangu was huge in the kick returns, and that helped the offense, get better field position or get, 6 points on the board. Greg Joseph was, knock on wood, he was pretty good.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to complain when the guy's not missing as many kicks as we've seen in the past. So
right.
Our standards are a little lower than probably most teams, but I thought his success was really nice to see.
We'd all like to have the Arizona game back, but, at the end of the day, that probably wasn't going to make a huge difference. Who knows? But yeah, is anybody going to kick to us this year on a kickoff with our man back there? Or are they just going to say, nope, we'll squib it, kick it short?
Yeah, we've seen in the past where some teams just do not want to kick to certain players, and with the football being lined up so closer a lot, I don't even remember what line it is anymore. I haven't watched football obviously in so long.
Yeah, 25, isn't it? Instead of the 20?
Yeah. It's something like that. It makes sense. It's been a couple of months. I need a little refresher, but
yeah. Or
we're seeing now more kicks into the end zone or into the stands. We're seeing now. I think the kicking, if it were up to me, I'd get rid of kick returns just because we don't really see much of it anymore.
Right.
And most of them usually just take the kneel in the end zone, and that's about it. It's just kind of like, well, do we need that extra commercial break there? So
now I'm second guessing myself. Maybe it's the 30. I'm getting confused with where we put it in high school and everything else too, but that's not the point. So I look at that too, and I think if you're Greg Joseph too, and a little competition, but I proved myself, confidence is everything with these kickers. We've seen that over the years too, and so hopefully that makes a difference. When you look at the schedule, I'm sure you've gone through this. What are you thinking as far as a potential record? Can we contend for the division? Are we a wild card? Are we still on the outskirts? I'm guessing you're not Colin Cowherd, who thinks we're winning 16 games.
I did not believe that he put that up there. I was still like, maybe it's just like someone making it up and not saying something on Twitter, but he said it.
Yeah.
I believe on my podcast I was talking about maybe, what was it? Realistically, 10-7. I'm getting a little optimistic at this time of the year. I'm thinking, maybe it's going to be 12-5.
Right. My first reaction was 10-7 as well. I looked at that and I went, well, I think you can split with the Packers. I think, some things like that. But there's always a game that you should win that you don't. And the key is, do you win games that you shouldn't? Like, my biggest no doubter is I don't think you can go on the road to Buffalo and win this year. But if you were to, you pull off an upset, because they happen, there pushes you toward that more 12-5 that you're talking about too.
Yeah, and that's like kind of where I was thinking. I was like, you split with the Packers, you probably win more than 50% against Detroit and Chicago combined. And then you have, New England on Thanksgiving, so that's kind of a little scarier just because, they're not obviously the same New England team, but it's still New England, it's still Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
So you have to look at that, and you got Philadelphia early. Maybe they're a little bit on a hotter start. I think they're kind of a wild card team where they could really be one of the better NFL teams, but obviously the NFC East is mostly a joke in the past, so I'm not really too worried about that one. But
yeah, could we beat the Cowboys for once this year? Is it possible that we can beat the Cowboys? So. It drives. And look at like playing Washington. I don't know if I'll get used to saying the Commanders, but the Kirk Cousins revenge game maybe. But again, that's a team you should handle. But there's these other ones like Arizona. That's a tricky team to try to figure out sometimes. And who knows? We can sit here and speculate all we want. And at the end of October, we might have no idea yet. It'll be tough. It's a tough start. You play the Packers to start the season. I think is really difficult, and then go on the road to Philadelphia. But in my mind, if you split the first two some way or the other, that's okay, and you can kind of get on from there. So,
the biggest key is just winning the games in the division and at least splitting with Green Bay. If you go 0-2, you're giving Aaron Rodgers 2 extra games to have that tiebreaker on you.
Yeah. Well, and it's so important to try to beat them at home at the start, because I think they finished the season at Green Bay and at Chicago in January. That's not ideal, and we've seen in the past that's difficult to win those cold weather games, and you'd like to not have to worry about a must win in Chicago in the last week of the season.
Yeah, exactly. You don't ever want to go into week 17 like hoping you're going to win, and I guess a divisional opponent, it's going to be even a lot more difficult.
Right. I don't really fear the Bears this year, but they're still the Bears, and like you say, division rivals. It doesn't always matter. You can throw the records out the window. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm excited about training camp. I think everybody probably is, and we'll see how the Vikings progress, and a little time off to let all this sink in. We're here with Andrew Neuruer. You can check out his website, letstalkmnsports.com. Find him on Twitter with all kinds of Let's Talk. No matter which professional sports team you like, you can find his podcast on anchor.fm as well. A lot of things Andrew's involved with. And we're going to switch gears now, and we're going to talk Minnesota Timberwolves, because the NBA draft is approaching rapidly as well. And Andrew being an expert on all things, I said let's talk that too. Let's just review a little bit, Andrew. Ending to the season, everybody's excited. Think you have a chance against Memphis, and then a typical sort of Minnesota ending. We find ways to blow leads. Did it give us more hope for the future, or is this just another Minnesota flame out that we're getting kind of used to with our pro sports teams?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard not to be a little disappointed. I don't think anyone had I think you could maybe be a little excited about where it was, 7th seed, you're a little better than a 7th seed because you were 10 games above 500. You had success against Memphis, and all those blown leads, you're thinking, if they should have won the series, ideally, but you are playing a 2 seed, you are playing a team that's better than you. So, I mean, they're not like a team where we saw in the past with Jimmy Butler, Jeff T, where that's going to maybe flame out over time. This is a young core. You got a new, exciting team with Jaden McDaniels. You have Chris Finch, that coach. I would say he's already one of the top 10, 15 coaches in basketball. So it's not really like one of those things where you're thinking our window is 2 years like it was with maybe Jimmy Butler. You're thinking, and it's only 20 years old. Karl Anthony Towns is 26, whatever he is. Even though you may look at the timeline and be like, well, they're a couple of years apart. I mean, by the time Ant is 24, 25, reaching his peak, I mean, you could still say like, hey, Karl Anthony Towns is only 30 years old. He's still a guy who can help win games. And to me, it's not really something I'm worried about. I think they're going to still be one of those heavy contender teams maybe in the future, like we've seen Phoenix, like we've seen Memphis.
Right, yeah. And you mentioned Chris Finch, and I haven't heard anything negative about him. He seems to get along well with the players. He does what those of us who are teachers try to do, where you have some discipline and you hold things to a line, but at the same time you let your players, or in this case for me, my students, be who they are without having too strict of rules, like everything has to fall black and white. That's what I always think of when I think of Chris Finch.
Yeah, no, I think where we saw maybe in the past with Ryan Saunders, he's a great guy. Everyone loved him. He was a player's coach. And you saw Tom Thibodeau. He was more of I'm going to work harder than everyone else. I'm going to be a little stricter than everything. Players didn't maybe like it. It's hard to find maybe the personnel, the players, everything to kind of have the stars align essentially. But we're seeing with Chris Finch, he has that like nice fine line of, I'm going to give you a little more criticism here, but at other times I'm going to be like your best friend essentially. So we saw in that final game of the series where he benched D'Angelo Russell. You might be on a max contract, but you're not playing well, so you're going to sit the bench. Right. And we've seen in the past where players kept rallying around him saying, hey, this is the best coach. I love playing for Chris Finch. So it's kind of a nice mix of both, essentially.
And that's got to help us when it comes to free agency at different times. Hey, we hear the guy's great to play for. Let's go to Minnesota, which you don't hear too often.
Yeah, Minnesota's not a free agent destination, so if you can have this, new ownership coming in, all these new faces, it's starting to look like Minnesota is not maybe like what we see in the past or where we see Sacramento, etc. It's kind of like Minnesota's on the up and up. We're signing all these new front office coaches. We're getting all these different players, like really like well-respected front office, like people from like around the league. We're picking them up. It's weird. I don't know how to like describe it. It's just like something you don't ever. We're just not used to that. It's different.
No, when the Timberwolves have been relevant, it's been for, like you say, a year or two at a time, and that's it. And then they kind of fade away again for a long time. And you mentioned the front office luring Tim Connolly over with, granted, a lot of money and a stake in the ownership. And some people were worried that, I lose my names. The guy they fired last year, and then they have the interim step in kind of, and he seemed to do fine. Did you need the change, or is this guy so good, Connolly, that it's worth everything to bring him in?
Yeah, I've kind of struggled with it because I guess if you're going to do it, might as well do it now. Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lawyer is supposed to take over, the team in a couple of years. So if they believe Sachin Gupta's a guy, you might as well do it now and maybe get that foundation started. And while I think he made the right decision of not making any moves, it might have come back to bite him a butt there, just because maybe, Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lawyer are two guys who are risk takers. They almost like someone who's going to go out there and really kind of put himself out there. And I don't know, and Sachin Gupta hasn't really shown that he's that guy.
Right.
I think he deserves the front office position, but Tim Connolly's a guy we've seen in the past where they don't want Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lawyer. They don't want the guessing game like, will this guy stick? Will this work? They just went out there, essentially just took a guy, plugged him in, and said, here you go, run this team like you've done in the past, and we'll have success as well.
Right. Because maybe the biggest thing Gupta did was he extended Patrick Beverley, who's been a great defensive player for the Timberwolves. So yeah, we'll see. You mentioned benching D'Angelo Russell earlier. Do you foresee him being on this roster next year? Or are they going to move on? Are they going to try to trade him? Is it time to say goodbye?
If it were up to me and you didn't have to worry about in a vacuum, I would say, yeah, you need to move on from him just because we saw what he did in the playoffs. And obviously, he had a really good regular season. So it's hard to be like, yeah, this guy was really good all season, but the playoffs, he was terrible. I mean, players have bad playoff series. There was only one series. So maybe next year I mean, he had the experience with Brooklyn, so you can't really say, well, it was his only time, really. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's with the amount of money he's making. If he was making $10 million less, I think we look at it and be like, yeah, stay with the team. You're a good player. But because he's making that max contract, because he's making over $30 million, it's hard to be like, yeah, take up, 30% of the salary cap.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And in that sense, I think you have to look. You have to look to move on from him. I don't think it's not a think. You should look to move on from him. What you get back is kind of a little bit more difficult. And I think we're going to see maybe him start the season on the roster, and then as the season goes on, maybe you move him at the trade deadline. But then at that point, maybe if you move him at the trade deadline, then you're ruining team chemistry, and at that point of the season, maybe it's not worth it if they are in the playoff hunt. Why would you get rid of your starting point guard who's averaging 18, 19 points a game?
Yep.
At that moment in time.
Yeah, it's a real. We'll see. It'll be one of the first key things for Mr. Conley when he steps in there is how are you going to handle this, and like you say, great regular season, kind of flopped in the playoffs, and hopefully that wouldn't put him in a bad place mentally or angry or whatever. Hopefully he's a professional and realizes I wasn't playing well, and in any sport, if you're not playing well and somebody else is, for the betterment of the team, you got to sit down. So let's talk draft. Number 19 pick. Do they stay there? Do they move up? Do they trade? It seems more likely they would trade back, if anything.
Yeah, and it's tough because, I've brought in a couple scenarios where I'm like, hey, maybe this guy is available at 19, but are you reaching at that point? But if it's your guy, who says you can't, just draft him at 19. But everyone, I do the same thing. Could you move back 4 spots, get that player, and maybe gain a second-round pick? But Minnesota already has 3 second-round picks, sorry. They have 3 second-round picks and the 19 picks. So are you moving back and gaining another second-round pick? At that point, I don't know if it's worth. Maybe you package those 2 second-round picks and move up in the draft as well. So there's a lot of different scenarios and a lot of stuff Minnesota can do. Maybe you package Malik Beasley in the thing to move up, or maybe you package the 19th pick and Malik Beasley to get maybe a power forward, etc.
Yeah, right. And you could look to the future too, possibly trading for some stuff in the future, but it's a little trickier in the NBA. You're not going to get first round picks, and you don't ever know where that's going to fall, and protected picks and who knows what. A couple names to throw at you. Walker Kessler, defensive standout. How would he fit in on this team?
Yeah, I wrote an article about him. I talked about him on podcast. Most of my coverage on letstalkmnsports.com has been through podcasts. I've been spending most of my time doing the Twins. So if you're curious about obviously draft stuff, I've covered centers, power forwards, small forwards, and this week I'll be covering guards. But Walker Kessler was probably my number one because I don't think Mark Williams will be there at 19. Jalen Duren, I'm a little bit skeptical of just because he doesn't really have an outside shot. Where Walker Kessler has shown you he can maybe shoot in the future. Maybe becomes that 33% guy. He's 7 foot, already 250, 260, whatever he is. Best defensive player in the draft. He's blocking 4 shots a game. What was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe he doesn't fit in the scheme of, they don't want to do drop coverage and all this stuff, but personally, if a guy can protect the rim like that, he can grab rebounds, I think you could see a nice fit alongside Karl-Anthony Towns. He's a guy that I think, if I'm drafting a center and Mark Williams off the board, he's my number one guy.
Right.
He's probably top 5 on my draft board.
Well, and because defense and rebounding were big struggles for the Timberwolves, throughout the season, and it was really amplified in the playoffs when you can't hold a lead and can't defend the rim, and so that makes sense to me too. Now, that one more name to throw at you, Terry Eason.
Yeah, he is a guy who reminds me of Marcus Morris, kind of your super athletic. The only negative to his game is that he doesn't maybe pass as much, and he doesn't really have any starting experience. He's a second-year player. He's coming up, 4 starts in 30 games, so not really any experience. So maybe long-term he's just a spark plug off the bench. But you have to like his athleticism. You have to like his shot making. There's a lot to like about him. He's a player I would be interested in 19, but just because of his maybe lack of passing and lack of starting games kind of scares me a little, especially when you have Anthony Edwards, especially when you have Jaden McDaniels, two players, or even Karl-Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, just like all these guys who need the ball, and then you throw him in there, and it's going to be difficult to see how the rock is shared, essentially.
Right, yeah. We're just not used to the Timberwolves having a draft pick this late. Maybe that's part of the problem. It's where they are in the lottery and everything else. We've got Andrew Neururer on Whatever Flips Your Waffle this week here on 365sportscast.com. We're talking Timberwolves with the draft coming up. What else, depending on who they end up drafting, what else do they need to do in order to move into kind of the upper echelon of the West? Were you challenged for home court advantage, being in the top 4 in the West, so you have home court in the first round of the playoffs?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is going to be finding that backup big, or maybe the power forward, or if D'Angelo Russell's not the answer at point guard, maybe move on from him and slide Patrick Beverley at the 1, and then you have Beverley and McDaniels, power forward that you traded for, and Karl-Anthony Towns, or maybe it's Karl-Anthony Towns, you sign up or you draft a power forward. I don't know, it's going to be interesting to see what they do, but the biggest need is going to be getting help on the glass and figuring out what you need to do with D'Angelo Russell, because his contract is coming up, and I think that's the big elephant in the room.
Right. And really, another year of experience for some of these guys, that makes a difference too. And staying out of the play-in tournament. And just little things like that, I think. Because, Memphis, a year ago, was kind of in a spot where the Timberwolves were. And then they've, through experience and some additions as well, moved up in the ranks pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think having those guys go through maybe a couple of those blown leads, while it might have sucked to be there and experiencing all these different emotions, next season, if they're in the playoffs and they have a 10, 15-point lead, maybe they realize what they need to do this time around to make sure that doesn't happen again. It's kind of just the growing pains. We saw it with Milwaukee. We've seen it with other teams in the past. As much as it sucks to go through now, this experience is going to be so valuable for these guys next year and down the line.
So you're saying there's hope. We got hope.
Yeah,
we have a chance.
There is definitely hope.
Yeah. By the time this airs, as you and I are talking, the NBA Finals are tied 2 games apiece. By the time this airs, one team will have a 3-2 advantage. I had seen that you had predicted Golden State in 6.
Yeah.
It's there's still a chance.
Yeah, there's still a chance. I don't know if I'm feeling too confident. I'm still sticking to Golden State winning. Maybe it's in 7, but I don't know. Boston looks so good. It's so hard to be Golden State. I was feeling really confident in Golden State just because of their experience, but I would say I'm 55-45 Golden State now. Yeah,
it's tough. The Celtics have been doing. I think maybe they've taken this Golden State's going to win. That seemed to be what they were hearing, and they said, "Well, just hold on. We're here for a reason." And
yeah. And both are really good defensive teams, so you're seeing defense again show up like it has in the past with teams that are in the finals.
Right. Yeah, you don't get there by just scoring 140 points and winning by 5 in a game. That's not what the NBA Finals are about.
No, exactly. Yeah. That's why Brooklyn kind of fizzled out. They try to go for that with Kyrie, James Harden, Kevin Durant, and not happening.
Yeah, right. And so, and even when you mention a team like that, we're seeing this. You don't have to have a big 3 or whatever. You have to play as a team. You do that and you win a lot of ball games.
Exactly, and that's kind of where we saw maybe Minnesota run into some problems in the playoffs, where it was a lot of whose turn is it now to take over the game, or who's going to get us out of this, this offensive rut. Minnesota maybe needs to find that point guard instead of D'Angelo Russell, like we saw what Jordan McLaughlin did when he came in Game 6. He was passing the ball, getting others involved.
Right.
And that's where the offensive spark came in. It wasn't just you go out there, do ISO, or drop 10, 15 points in a row. It's finding guys that'll pass the ball, get others involved, and that's usually what gets the offense going. It's not usually 3 ISO players out there.
Right, yeah. Well, we've covered the Vikings. We have some high hopes for them this year, at least to get back to the playoffs. Talk about the Timberwolves. We think that they could have some opportunities to move up again. Andrew Neuruer, check him out. Let'sTalkMNSports.com. You can check out his podcast on Anchor.fm. Find him on Twitter as well with all the Let's Talk various sports teams in our area. Andrew, thanks for coming back to the program and talking Vikings and Timberwolves.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be right back. A quick shout out to Mark and AJ, the guys behind the scenes at 365sportscast.com back in New York. They kind of got this whole thing rolling. I'm having a blast. I hope you are too listening. I hope you listen to some of the other shows on the network as well. Check everything out at 365sportscast.com. If you have arrived at this show because of some promo work or anything else, I'd love to hear from you. What you like about the show, what you think could be improved. Email me, waffleflipper22@gmail.com, or message me on Twitter at Mr. D1973. And now it's time for the state of Minnesota sports. A little addition to the Vikings talk that we had with Andrew Neuruer. The other day, they signed just a small signing, but you never know. Andrew Mintz played for the Broncos last year. He was an undrafted rookie, had some hamstring issues and everything like that, but he is another edge rusher. Outside linebacker, would fit really well into this new defensive scheme. And so, it doesn't hurt you to sign these guys and see what they can bring to camp, whether it's competition, depth, whatever. Clearly the Broncos had seen something in him, and they've been a defensive-minded team for a long time, so maybe that would work out well for the Vikings. When we look at the Lynx, it's hard to hold out hope for much longer for the Lynx. Sylvia Fowles has been hurt. Kayla McBride got hurt the other night. Things are falling apart, and they're losing to teams like Indiana, which aren't very good either. Boy, it's hard to say it's time to pull the plug on them again, as we've mentioned in a league in which so many teams make the playoffs, but you can't just keep doing this with limited roster space and people being hurt, and a shame for Fowles. Who knows what this is going to do for the rest of her final season here, but things don't look good for the Lynx right now. And if they could turn it around, and certainly have some talent to do that, it'd be a great thing. But just like we saw with the Minnesota Twins in 2021, you start losing some games early and some things happen, and it's hard to get that mental frame of mind back. Now, they're professionals, of course, and it's different than you or I playing, pickup basketball or beer league softball or anything like that. But this could be the end of the Lynx playoff run. Hopefully I'm wrong. We'll have to stick around and keep an eye on it. Let's finish with our Minnesota Twins this week in our state of Minnesota sports. There's a lot of talk. They went into that 9-game stretch playing at Toronto, home against the Yankees, home against the Rays. And if you would have told me they're going to come out on top 5-4 overall, 5-4 record in there, I would have been pretty happy. And then you look at some of the games they let a 7-3 lead get away against the Yankees after just crushing Garrett Cole, and you're not going to be able to say that often. You might face Cole again later in the season or possibly in a playoff series, and he could dominate you, and you can't take advantage of that, and the bullpen fell apart. It was frustrating. I remember after the Twins hit the back-to-back home runs in the first inning, my wife Michelle said, well, they better win this game. Well, they didn't. You should win a game in which you hit 3 home runs in the first inning off one of the best starters in Major League Baseball, and they failed to do that. And those are the frustrating kind of things where, again, can you get over that hump? Can you put yourself among the elite teams in Major League Baseball? And I still think that the Twins are a good team, but they're right below teams like the Yankees and the Astros and the Dodgers, those kind of teams that people are expecting to make a run in the playoffs, possibly be in the World Series. If you're the Tampa Bay Rays, too, you look at they've lost 4 out of 6 to the Minnesota Twins in a very competitive American League East. If the Rays miss out on the playoffs, they might look at something like that and say, wow, we couldn't even go 500 against the Twins. Those kind of things make a difference. And so if you're in Tampa Bay, well, I don't know how many people in Tampa Bay care about the Rays, but if you are, you're thinking, we've missed out on opportunities. Just like the Twins will look and say, geez, if we win some more games against Detroit in a big series and if we can pull that one off against the Yankees. I know that it's day to day and there's 162 games, but at the end of the season, when you've missed moving up in the playoff ranks by a game or two, you look back at some of those games that you feel like you should have had, those games you feel like you should have won, and then they do stand out. Boy, remember that time we blew a 4-run lead to the Yankees? And that one extra game would have made a difference. Yeah, you can point back to those, and it gets a little frustrating. But again, the Twins are in first place. They have some big series coming up. When you think about Cleveland in the near future, first they're in Seattle right now. They won their first game in Seattle. Byron Buxton's been on a tear. He goes into this deep slump, and suddenly he's hitting the ball out of the ballpark like nobody's business. They'll head down to Arizona over the weekend, and then you face some stretches where you've got Cleveland coming up for a couple key series, and if you can take it to the Guardians, win 2 out of 3, win 2 out of 3, and Andrew and I talked about that a little bit once we got off the interview, talked a little bit about the Twins. It's a win 2 out of 3, win 2 out of 3. You keep doing that, and you're going to put yourself in the playoffs. Keep the Guardians at bay. The White Sox are falling off the face of the earth. Tony La Russa's on the hot seat. He tried to justify intentionally walking a guy with a 1-2 count. I can't buy that in any frame of mind. You can pitch around a guy, make him try to chase something, but I don't think you ever intentionally walk somebody with a 1-2 count. So La Russa's time may have come in Chicago. The team that many of us, myself included, thought would take this division quite handily this year and be a contender to go to the World Series. But you're in Seattle, you win the first game. Hopefully by the time you listen to this, they've at least won 2 out of 3 in Seattle. Perhaps look at a sweep. Arizona, not great. Again, win these games that you should win. And, I'd like to point out a few guys that have really stood out. The first game against Seattle, Chris Archer threw 4 innings again. And I've not been a huge Chris Archer fan. I thought it was a good signing at the start of the year. Hey, here's a guy who, if he works out again, good to go. You can count on Chris Archer for 4 innings. That's about it. They're still apparently trying to build him back from injuries that he's had and everything. But those are the games you've got to count on your bullpen. You better have your bullpen set up for a Chris Archer game. And they did against the Mariners, having guys come in and pitch an inning. And Emilio Pagan finished everything off. The Emilio Pagan experience has gotten a little bit better as of late. He's been more solid in not making these really, really interesting when he comes in there, loading the bases, full counts, that kind of stuff. He's been more effective, and that's a good thing to see. You look at some other people as well. Gio Urshela stands out to me as one of the great parts of that Josh Donaldson trade. Urshela has been solid. He's been in the lineup all the time. And as I say that, it means he'll probably get hurt. He gets hits, big hit. There was a stat that in close and late settings in a ball game this year, Urshela is hitting .381. Well, all right, there's a guy you want to have at the plate in those situations. So Urshela has been very solid defensively and making some noise offensively as well. You look at Trevor Larnach at the start of the season. None of us were going to say Trevor Larnach is an everyday player, but there he is. Once he got past that groin injury, he's been out there. He's been raking a little bit more. That's what you need to have. Pitching-wise, Devin Smeltzer, he has to be here to stay. I don't even think he's got any options left. You've got to keep Devin Smeltzer up there. I don't care how you work this and finesse this when these guys come back from injury and Sonny Gray is coming back from injury. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Devin Smeltzer's there. You know who you get rid of? Dylan Bundy. He's been bad. He gave us 3 wins at the start of the year, and he's been bad ever since. He doesn't have the velocity. He doesn't have the control. It might be time to cut ties with Dylan Bundy. If it's a choice between what do we do here, well, you keep Devin Smeltzer. He has proved himself. I mean, he's 3-0. He's got a 2.38 ERA. Why would you not keep a guy like that compared to the guy with the 7 or 8 ERA who just can't get batters out anymore? Again, it was worth signing him to a low-risk contract at the start of the year. But now we're at the stage where the Twins are in a playoff race. You can't throw him out there every 5 days. You just can't do it. You can keep working with Archer. He's made more starts than anybody in this team because so far he's stayed healthy, and hopefully that continues too. But Bundy, it's time to say goodbye to Dylan Bundy if that's what it means to keep Devin Smeltzer. Another person to point out, Griffin Jax out of the bullpen. When you need somebody to come in and get a hold in a late inning situation, he's not ready to be a closer yet, I don't think. But the idea that his fastball is up about 3 miles an hour, 2.5, 3 miles an hour from last year, that's pretty impressive. He's throwing around 95 miles an hour on his fastball, and he comes in crucial situations. I was leery at the beginning of the year based on what he had done last year, but he has really evolved. And a lot of credit goes to Wes Johnson, the pitching coach. I think he does a nice job with these guys and shows them what needs to be done. Developing those young pitchers, a Griffin Jax, a Devin Smeltzer, those kind of guys. Even Chris Archer gives a lot of credit to Wes Johnson for helping him and giving him some new ideas about how to pitch. I mean, Archer's been around for a while, but Wes Johnson has kind of helped him find some new tricks to get batters out, and that's a really important part of it. That's, we look past, Rocco gets bashed a lot and everything, but I think Wes Johnson's done a fine job and has helped the Twins pitching staff become a little bit better this year, and that's what they're going to have to be. So, big series coming up. Every series is a big series when you're in the playoff mix. You hate to lose a series, and you just, like I say, 2 out of 3. Keep people healthy. Keep Buxton healthy. Keep Correa healthy. Figure out how to keep Luis Arraez in the lineup every single game if you can. Give him a day off every now and then. But, man, here's a guy who all of a sudden he's hitting some home runs. He leads the league in batting average, on base percentage. He has been a spectacle to watch and hopefully very worthy, certainly we would think, of an all-star selection for Luis Arraez this year. We'll have to see how that plays out next month. And that's the state of Minnesota sports. And now it's time for This Week in Minnesota Sports History. On June 15th in 1964, the Twins obtained Jim Mudcat Grant from Cleveland for Les Stang, and a great trade for the Twins. Of course, Mudcat was a great pitcher for the Twins during their glory years in the 60s. On June 15th in 1992, former Twin Jeff Reardon broke Raleigh Fingers' saves record with number 342 while he was pitching for the Boston Red Sox. That record, of course, has since been broken more than once. On June 15th in 2008, Scott Baker became the first Twins pitcher to strike out 4 consecutive batters in one inning. One, of course, reached on a wild pitch, and then he struck out the next guy as well. So 4 strikeouts in one inning. Twins still lost 4-2 in Milwaukee. And on June 15th in 2019, the Twins retired Joe Mauer's number 7. On June 16th in 1982, Frank Viola, Sweet Music, picked up his first career win in a 5-2 victory in Kansas City. He would, of course, go on to be a key part of the 1987 World Series, Cy Young Award winner after that, before being traded to the Mets. In 1991, on June 16th, the Baltimore Orioles ended the Twins' 15-game winning streak by scoring 3 runs in the 9th inning of a 6-5 win. On June 17th, in 1993, Major League Baseball owners voted to expand the playoffs for the first time in 25 years, adding a wild card team. That would start in 1995, only because 1994, of course, was the lockout. On June 17th in 1997, the NHL announced that they would add a franchise to Minnesota in the year 2000. That, of course, would be the Minnesota Wild. And on June 17th in 2017, Royce Lewis signed a $6.725 million contract as the number 1 overall pick, the largest ever for a high school player. On June 18th in 2015, Kenny Vargas, remember him? He hit the 100th walk-off home run in Twins history in a 2-1 win over the Cardinals at Target Field. On June 19th, in 1954, Harmon Killebrew was signed to an amateur free agent contract by the Washington Senators. He would, of course, go on to be one of the all-time greats for the Senators and our Minnesota Twins. In 2007, on June 19th, Bert Blyleven said he would shave his head if Johan Santana pitched a complete game shutout, which he did, in a 9-0 win over the Mets. Santana took care of shaving Blyleven's head. On June 20th, in 1986, the Twins traded John Butcher to Cleveland for Neil Heaton. Butcher, of course, was kind of a mid-range starter for the Twins. Heaton was an important part coming out of that bullpen and doing some spot starting as well. On June 21st, in 1969, the Twins scored a club record 11 runs in the 10th inning of a 14-4 win in Oakland. And on June 21st, in 2011, the Twins tied a Major League Baseball record with the first 8 batters getting hits, 4 singles, 4 doubles, in San Francisco off Madison Bumgarner. The streak ended when pitcher Carl Pavano batted and was retired. The Twins would win 9-2. Well, all of our sports seasons are over in the Richland, Heartland, Ellendale, Geneva area. Baseball had lost their game to Belle Plaine. We had speculated they needed to win 2 games. They would have had to beat Belle Plaine and New Ulm. Belle Plaine went on to lose to New Ulm, who then promptly 2 nights later lost to Sibley East, the team that had first beaten our Panthers in the playoffs. So Sibley East is in the state baseball tournament. Good luck to the Wolverines. And Quinn Van Meldingham, who was on the program last week for an interview about her trip to the state track meet, finished 13th in the prelims, but she broke her own school record running the 800-meter run in 2:25.87. And according to Coach Dewey Ferber, we're single A here, small schools. If she had been in double A or triple A, she would have been much higher up in the standings. Just goes to show the great running talent that there are in our small schools. But Quinn's got 4 more years, and I'm sure she'll continue to make some great accomplishments as a runner. Well, that's going to do it for another helping of waffles here at 365sportscast.com. I'm glad you decided to join us this week. Hope you'll continue to tune in each and every week right here at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. If you visit 365sportscast.com, you can also see the rebroadcast schedule in case you can't catch us when we appear for the first time. Also remember, shows archived to YouTube. You can check out this or any previous show there if you want to check out some of the interviews that we've had and see if we've made any prognostications that make any sense. If you have any feedback, if you think that you might make for a good interview, email me, waffleflipper22@gmail.com, or message me on Twitter at MrD1973. Next week, we'll find out some more about Minnesota sports. How will the Twins be doing as they enter a part of the schedule that's really important in the American League Central? The Vikings will be off. The Lynx hopefully we'll get back on. I'll have another special guest to delve into all that and more. Thanks for joining me. This is Mark Domeyer signing off with